All right. Hello, everybody. I'm here today with Louis Belleau, friend of mine. Louis is a writer, men's work facilitator, transformational coach, and a researcher at Psygaia. Louis, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jordan. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
You as well. So, diving right in, I felt like diving into the deep end might be fun today. So, I'm curious, what is the cutting edge of your current exploration of reality? What feels most exciting and most fresh?
Cool. Great question. Yeah, I feel like probably what I'm doing with my research. So the Psygaia organization you mentioned earlier, I'm also working at the University of Ottawa where I'm doing my master's, and I'm writing a thesis called the Psygaia hypothesis about um, potential symbiotic relationship between psychedelic producing organisms and humans, and how this emergent property of like the psychedelic experience might, in a sense, offer uh, a deeper, more interconnected intelligence that is more aligned and harmonious with the planetary system. And so that's why when people take psychedelics, we see that they are more connected to nature, generally healthier, and feeling more connected to themselves, to spirituality. And so, in a sense, psychedelics aren't just healing agents, but like teachers. Um, I like to look back to the indigenous traditions, how they considered psychedelics as like sacred teachers or spiritual allies. I think that's very much what they are. It's important to remember that these substances, or most of them, a lot of them, come from living organisms. And so the psychedelics help us tune into the web of intelligence that we are a part of. Um, yeah.
Beautiful, man. That's great. I'm curious to hear a little more about the Psygaia hypothesis, what exactly that hypothesis is, if there's any more of it to unpack, and how it connects to our larger collective moment at this time of planetary transition, planetary initiation.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think the core of it is that it essentially proposes we might have this symbiotic relationship, and that the symbiotic relationship, when approached in with reverence, in right relationship, it influences cognitions and behavior towards an adaptation within the planetary system, fostering a form of, or not a form of, but homeostasis, planetary homeostasis. And I further suggest that this happens through cognitive symbiosis, which is essentially a form of intelligence that isn't uh, possible separately. So it requires the interaction between the two species in order to create this new form of cognition. And in a sense, you could also consider it a form of interspecies communication. And so by re-engaging with these psychedelic organisms, which, according to myself and before me, many indigenous traditions, these teachers, these allies, we can rediscover this form of what I call ecological consciousness, which is basically an awareness or intelligence or consciousness that recognizes relationality and our embeddedness within the planetary system and beyond as well. And so I think that, through the psychedelic renaissance, we have an opportunity to very much rediscover a more harmonious relationship with ourselves and with each other, with nature, with the cosmos. But it requires the proper integration of psychedelics into society and culture. I think if we just copy paste psychedelics into the current psychotherapeutic paradigm, that's very, materialistic, reductionistic, and individualistic, we won't go very far. And so ultimately, yeah, my perspective is that psychedelics are kind of like a Trojan horse to collective change. Obviously, this isn't going to happen in a day or two, but it'll be a multi-generational process of change. And so wielding them properly, understanding them properly, and then integrating them properly into our lives as a society and culture is I think, a part of that transformation a lot of people might be feeling or witnessing in the world.
Hmm.
Uh,
Beautiful. Um, what would you say are the biggest shadows of the psychedelic movement and the shadows of psychedelic journeying in general? Like what are the kind of failure modes or the things to watch out for?
Right. Yeah. I think it's Stan Groff said that psychedelics are like non-specific amplifiers of the subconscious. And so I think that's true on one level. I think they are also specific in some ways, in that, a lot of people who use psychedelics end up behaving better towards nature, feeling more spiritually connected. So there are some general principles or patterns that you can see in people who use psychedelics. I think that gives us a insight into the um, intelligence of nature and the way that it seeks to harmonize or come into wholeness in a sense. I think there's also something to the inner healing intelligence, or what I like to call the innate healing intelligence, because it's all around us. It's not just within us. If you uh, stab a tree with an axe, it will heal. So will your body, and so if you give it the right conditions to heal. But all this to say, I think that psychedelics are coming in on this very already strong and um, ingrained form of consciousness that's extremely egocentric. Like Western culture very much functions from this individualistic perspective, which I think has its merits. I'm a fan of individualism on many levels, but at the same time, we no longer have the wisdom of community and the wisdom of relationality and being together in relationship and connection. And so when we use psychedelics from this individualistic place, we integrate also in a very individualistic way, and also make space for the ego to grow rather than to be integrated and yeah, I guess integrated into more of a community or communal relational ontology. I don't know if that's a word I should use, but like, you know, um, yeah, a relational ontology is necessary to properly integrate psychedelics into one's life in a way that allows one to see the earth as a living being and to act in right relationship to the world. And because people don't have access to this ontology, people aren't taught it. People function very much from a survival place and potentially from a place of scarcity and a place of need and greed. And we psychedelics can potentiate those forms of consciousness. And I think we're seeing that already in many aspects when we look at the psychedelic renaissance. And so, having these conversations and also making space for different ways of seeing and more communal ways of approaching psychedelics. Um, Communal in the sense that we're using them together, but also with elders and with people who, know what they're doing. That can essentially not, it won't, we're still going to face the issues of integrating psychedelics into this ego-driven society and culture, but by approaching them more carefully and with wisdom and in a relational manner, help. Um, Blanking on the word I'm looking for here. Not avoid them, but anyways, I'll just use the word avoid for now. We'll help avoid them.
Gotcha. Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, for me, when I tune into the shadows of psychedelics, I think for one of like people using them in kind of non-sacred contexts, like just kind of taking them haphazardly in party contexts, like we used to do back in the day. I'm certainly not immune from this. And, in a way, it's kind of like experimentation is just kind of part of life. But at the same time, I do think a lot of people have no idea what they're getting into with psychedelics. They don't realize what it means to open the doorway to the unconscious mind. They don't realize what could be living in there and what could come out when that door is thrown open. And so I think a lot of people do find themselves just like experimenting with psychedelics in contexts that are not really optimized for it. And then they have like stuff come up that they were not ready for, and they're completely in the wrong context to deal with that. So I think that's been a historic shadow since the reemergence of psychedelics in a big way in Western culture, a few decades ago. And I think, yeah, I mean, I think now, there's some shadows around psychedelic capitalism, I would say, with people just wanting to turn psychedelics into the next big the next big investment strategy, the next big business strategy, and just trying to cash in, which, as you alluded to, there can be some sticky and tricky things there. And then I think in general, when you have this huge wave of renewed interest in psychedelics, it can feel like they're all the rage right now. There's kind of like hype around psychedelics. And so people can just feel like, oh, I better be part of this. I better try this because everybody's talking about it. But I think I generally really strongly encourage people to really tune in with their heart and ask themselves, am I really called to this path? Is there an authentic calling here? Because I don't think psychedelics are for everyone. Personally, I think a lot of people, it's it's not there's not an authentic calling there, and it would probably be destabilizing or confronting for a lot of people in ways that might not help them. Like they might not be ready for that level of kind of holding up the mirror or opening the door of the unconscious. And so, yeah, that's kind of what comes up for me is, and I guess as well, I've also seen shadows of, you know, people becoming destabilized or ungrounded or inflated, kind of grandiose. I myself have experienced becoming inflated, grandiose, kind of like God complex, guru complex kind of thing. And that's pretty common, I think, for people to develop a bit of a like, oh, I've seen the light now and I'm here to save the world kind of thing. And a bit of a spiritual superiority complex too, of like, oh, now I'm in the, special elite class of psychedelic users. So yeah, those are some of the ways I see the shadows showing up myself. Curious if
Yeah,
that
thanks.
brings up anything for you.
Thanks for sharing. Definitely. I mean, I get that too. I thought I was like an acid prophet in my teenage years, you know. Um, but yeah, in terms of the capitalist thing, I think about that a lot. I've written a piece called Mixed Psychedelics on the topic, and um, I mean, we see it everywhere with Compass Pathways trying to patent very simple practices like hand holding or using certain types of music for psychedelic therapy. Um, I think what I was speaking to earlier is just the fact that this sense of ego and individualism is seeping into the psychedelic renaissance, and we see that through everything you've described in more detail, including the guru complex, mixed psychedelics, and yeah, also the danger of using them in unsupportive settings. I think a lot of people end up trying psychedelics at parties or in less than ideal settings, and we just lack the understanding and the education around them, the cultural context to make sense of them in a way that's wholesome. And so I think education is such an important aspect of the psychedelic renaissance. Rather than continuing the failures of the war on drugs, which was all about suppression and lies, propaganda. I think just the truth and spreading correct information is so important. Yeah.
Yeah, well said. And I'm curious, do you feel psychedelics have a crucial role to play in up-leveling collective wisdom to the point that's necessary for us to kind of thread the eye of the needle here and avoid the more dystopian timelines for humanity?
Yeah, I think so. I believe they're very powerful substances in medicine. They're sacrament medicine. They're tools. They're allies and teachers. They are all of those things, and we need all of those things right now. Um, and I think the simple fact that psychedelics, there's studies that show psychedelics increase people's connection to nature and make people more environmentally friendly in their behavior, as well as pro-social. And there's a obvious and unavoidable spiritual aspect to psychedelics that I think is also key. Reawakening that spiritual consciousness that is natural to all of us. I think a lot of people's understanding of spirituality is, I want to say, misinformed due to religious dogma. A lot of people see spirituality as something outside nature. Even the word supernatural means like super or beyond nature, but really, traditionally, spirit and nature are very tied together. They're one and the same, and I think psychedelics help us learn that, help us see the sacred in life, in nature, and I think that's some of the most important work we have to do is remembering the divinity of life, so that we can come back into right relationship with it. I don't think psychedelics are the end all be all solution, but they're a big part of the solution, or not, the solution, but the process of planetary collective healing.
Hmm. Well said, man. That leads nicely into something else I wanted to ask you about, which is what is reality itself? What are your fundamental spiritual or ontological views about what this is that we're experiencing after all your
Right.
journey?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, first thing that comes to mind is that we don't have individual minds. We exist in mind together. And so the mind is of the universe rather than, you having your mind, I have my mind. I like the idea of the brain, or at least our body in some way, the nervous system, as Aldous Huxley called it a reducing valve, but a channel of sorts, an antenna maybe. And ultimately, I see the universe as like very relational and participatory, alive. I don't believe we're separate observers peering into um, a like mechanical universe. More so, we're entangled participants in a intelligent and evolving web of life. And so our consciousness co-arises with what we pay attention to. Um, yeah, I think, it might be called like an ecological non-dualism. We're not in the world, we are of it. I think psychedelics, meditation, breath work, which have been like my three core practices, as well as yoga as a system, as an 8-point system, have all revealed that truth to me again and again in different ways. And in a sense, I think this truth also aligns with the spiritual traditions, at least the ones that I've studied. Um, yeah, I'll leave it at that for now.
Hmm. Beautiful, man. And earlier you used the word divinity, and I think elsewhere
Mm-hmm.
I've seen you use the word God. I'm curious
Mm-hmm.
what those terms mean for you and how they fit into that picture.
Mm-hmm. So for me, God is nature, really. And by nature, I mean in the broadest sense, from the amoeba and microorganisms and the intelligence that functions there, all the way to the planets and to the, furthest galaxies. Um, yeah, I like that idea of nature as God. It keeps things in context for me, and it helps me live in right relationship to all of it. I think divinity is essentially the understanding that the world is miraculous, and acting in a way that recognizes that. I know, I think Einstein said like there's two ways to live your life, either as if everything is miraculous or if nothing is. And divinity is essentially the most essential quality of life that we can recognize when we're present, when we're connected, um, and through grace too. Through the grace of nature of God. Um, yeah, I think ultimately it's all divine. It's all a divine play, and we blind ourselves to that because we have to survive. We're paying attention to the news, to the price of Bitcoin, or whatever it is. But ultimately, under all of that, there's this very special, sacred, divine essence to life.
Yeah, well said. Just to riff on that a little bit myself, I feel like when I ask myself, what is reality?
Mm-hmm.
One of the first answers that comes up is just, well, this right here, you're looking at it, and what is divinity? What is God? Well, this right here, you're looking at it, like everything you see or seem or experience or dream, anything that occurs is that as far as I can see. So it seems that we share a kind of, I would say more like, I would say my view is more like trans dual. I kind of stopped liking the term non-dual as much because it felt like it could be kind of negating the relationality, because I do experience this very real relationality and multiplicity and individuality and this individuated flowering and how and these this web of relationality among all these kind of co-emergent individuated flowerings. And yet I feel like there's this transdual kind of transcendent yet inclusive substrate, the substratum that is everything, and it's just kind of spontaneously dancing or spontaneously shining forth as this cosmic unfoldment. And it's as you say, fundamentally miraculous, astonishing. It's very mysterious. It's kind of like the mystery is baked in, and the closer you look at it, the more it opens into itself. There's kind of like there's always more of it. It's like it doesn't resolve neatly into any particular map or structure. It's like every map or structure is like opens up fresh angles on it, but it's never pinned
Right.
down by any one perspective, map or structure. And it seems that at its core, and in my experience, it has a benevolent quality. It has like an unconditionally loving, all embracing intelligence that this is all kind of shining from and emanating as in a profound sense. And it seems like when we just become truly sensitive to life, we let ourselves really like open to it. And psychedelics definitely have been a big part of my journey of doing that. We discover that the human organism has capacities that we hadn't realized were there for really sensitively opening to reality and exploring this vastly expanded range of modes and realizing, wow, reality can be with itself in infinite ways. There's infinite possibilities here of how it can be with itself, how it can express, and they're all that. They're all reality. And yeah, the more sensitively you be with it and you feel yourself as it, belonging in it, utterly embedded non-separately within it, there's just this innate sense of wholeness that does give off this kind of ambient quality of grace. And we belong here, this is home, and we're held here in some profound sense. So
Mm, thank
yeah.
you. Yeah. I like that the transdual thing. I was thinking like, oh yeah, also interdual perhaps be a good one, good word for it. I feel that too. Um, there's just not one, not two, and perhaps more than two as well.
Mm.
And what you were sharing reminds me of, a part of the hypothesis looks at why do these plants and mushrooms, these organisms, facilitate access to knowledge of this divinity and to feelings of spirituality, of sacredness. And I think it's because, in a sense, it's a way for nature to remember itself and to stay aligned with itself. And so I think, spirituality and spiritual experience specifically has a deeply biological. It's a biological phenomenon. I think biology is deeply spiritual and spirituality is deeply biological. Just like I said earlier, nature is God, and so the mushrooms and the plants like ayahuasca or psilocybin-containing mushrooms, in a sense, are nature's way of reminding us that everything is connected and there's a sacred quality to it. Um, yeah, I thought I'd share that because it felt relevant.
Yeah, well said. I love, in recent times I've kind of been experiencing this increasing feeling of science as deeply spiritual. And for a while, I think after my psychedelic openings, I had a bit of a bias against science for a period of time because I associated it with materialism and nihilism. And yet, looking at it through a spiritual lens and just seeing it as like, oh, this just reveals more layers of the miraculousness. These are, this is another set of modes and ways we can engage with this. We can look at this, and it just shows even more of the astonishment. It reveals billions of bejeweled galaxies, and in the other direction, it reveals, yeah, the wonders of biology and cellular DNA, atomic, subatomic, astonishment. So it's, yeah, I,
Definitely. Yeah, thanks for saying that. I do think science is a beautiful thing. It's the universe trying to know itself in a specific kind of way, in a way that seems to get along with our rationality, the rational part of what we are. Our left brain. Um, but Albert Einstein and Carl Sagan were deeply spiritual beings, but also amazing scientists.
yeah, that's true. I made a song about Carl Sagan once. And yeah, and yeah, I was also just going to note that I experience psychedelics as some kind of portal of ancient intelligence. Like somehow these these portals or these, yeah, receptors or, connection points have emerged from divinity, from nature, and they are somehow connected to an ancient intelligence of the earth. And it often seems like ancient intelligence from other dimensions or other planets. I mean, the types of experiences that are possible with psychedelics are so far outside the everyday human experience that it's literally like, I mean, it's utterly flabbergasting. It's like gobsmacking. And the way in which these experiences often seem to be perfectly calibrated for your unique beings, for your unique karma, your unique life situation. It can literally feel like your entire karmic history has been scanned and it's been discovered like what will be the most optimal series of kind of symmetries and visions and musicalities and attunements and calibrations to flux through this being in the next few hours to most auspiciously catalyze the next chapter of this being's existence. I mean, it's really like
That's
quite
beautiful.
unbelievable. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a wonderful way to put it. I mean, I often describe psychedelic, inner work or healing as a form of karmic cleansing. So I relate to what you said.
Yeah, well said, man. Yeah, the ayahuasca definitely seems like it's like a purification, be a deep
Hmm.
purification. I mean, it can feel like your soul's being wrung out like a washcloth and you're just being the bottom of the barrel is being scraped and it's literally coming out your physical mouth. You're just vomiting
Hmm.
it out. You might be shitting it out. It's like you're being cleaned out. It's like it's crazy. Yeah. I actually got married in an ayahuasca ceremony.
Wow,
Yeah, we
that's
had
awesome. I didn't
our
know that.
wedding. Yeah, we
Wow.
had our wedding at Kumankaya Healing Center, and
Okay.
yeah, we drank on our wedding night, and we had our family there. So that was very wild to have
Did
my mom.
everyone drink, or was it just you two?
Not everyone. The curanderos, our dear friends Remy and Ashley, and us, my wife Tanya and I, and no one else felt the call, or people were also like on contraindicated medications. But yeah, it became like, man, it was wild because it was one of the most purgative experiences I've had with ayahuasca. And my experience was that with my family there, it was like very deep ancestral stuff was kind of like coming out of everyone, even if they hadn't drank. And I was just kind of the designated pressure release valve for the ceremony. It was just like
Wow.
purging these kind of ancient demons from my lineage and
Yeah.
ancient karmic residues. And yeah,
Yeah.
it was deep, man.
Wonderful. Yeah,
Yeah.
I get that though. I can't imagine doing it with family. I haven't done that yet, but for me, ayahuasca and mushrooms are often very yeah, it goes far back, dealing with the ancestral stuff, um, and the baggage that comes with that.
Mm, absolutely. I wanted to ask you, what is the deepest wisdom you've discovered for navigating life itself? Perhaps a few of the core principles or distillations that feel most valuable for you as a being navigating life.
Hmm, cool question. These are heavy hitting questions. Yeah, I mean, immediately I'm thinking like trust nature or um, nature's the greatest teacher. Like yeah, I very much trust nature in that I recognize it as a process, an intelligent process. Um, so maybe like trust the process, boil it down to trust the process. I think that relates to faith too, like religious or spiritual faith. It's just another take on it or different words to describe that same thing. Um, being in right relationship, this one I very much have, indigenous teachers and elders to thank, but recognizing that I have a role here and Buddhism too, I think the concept of interbeing is somewhat related to this, is like recognizing that we are always in relationship to everything around us, human and non-human. And so the work really and my spiritual practices of being in right relationship. And we recognize what right relationship is through doing the work and listening to nature, being in tune with nature. Um, and practices for that include psychedelics, mindfulness meditation, conscious connected breath work, and there's many others too, like yoga. So those are my main ones. I don't know. I think there's something about humility and gratitude as well. I think that might relate to right relationship, but to me, humility and gratitude are like core aspects of how I want to operate in the world. I don't have any tattoos, and the only tattoos I've ever considered having are on my thighs, humility and gratitude on each thigh, just so that I can be reminded all the time. Yeah, because we're facing like this grand mystery, we can talk about it all we want, but ultimately the quote unquote secrets of the universe, I think, are or will always be beyond our ability to reason, rationalize. They will always be beyond the lens of science. These are like science, for example. It's a mental model. It's a way of seeing the world, and so you can't mistake the map for the territory. And I think through reason, through thought, it will always be a map and not the territory. The only way you can really experience the territory is through deep practices like meditation, psychedelic journeying, breath work. Yeah, I'd say trust the process, be in the right relationship, and maintain humility and gratitude towards the mystery. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful, man. Those are great principles. I was just saying to somebody yesterday, I think, that gratitude is one of the most powerful forms of magic, you could say, because gratitude
Totally.
literally transfigures all of life into a divine miracle. If you
Right.
cultivate gratitude, that's how you see that it's a gift. Radical thanksgiving allows you to see that this has all been given freely, and no one said that you had to get this journey through the universe and be able to look upon never before seen master artworks from the heart
Right.
of creative intelligence. Every single moment is a new master artwork. I mean, when you start to, give thanks for that, it just changes everything. It's complete opposite of, victimhood and complaining, which tends toward more of a downward spiral. So,
Yeah. Well, it changes your relationship to the world. It changes how you see it, and ultimately, through your perception, you change your behavior. So it is a very powerful, path. This reminds me, I would love to hear your answer to this question, but I also wanted to add like balance. The word balance just came to mind, and that I think there's just like trusting or having faith in nature. You can see that nature, everything is in balance. Everything is, and even when we don't see the balance, there is balance to it. In the same way in systems theory, like there needs to be destabilization or chaos in order to reach new levels of stability and balance. And so um, I think there's something really important regarding balance, and but that might relate to being in right relationship, right? But yeah, I'm curious if you what your thoughts are on this question.
yeah, thanks for asking. Yeah, I love that you started with trust the process, because I think faith and trust are utterly fundamental for me too. It's just like let go or be dragged, surrender to life, surrender to God. Life is here, life is happening, and resistance is futile. Resistance generates suffering, and it also means like holding space when resistance is coming up, which you can't always help. It's like not resisting the resistance when it's there as well. It's like just learning to hold space for yourself, trusting the process to the point where you trust the full spectrum of life, whatever is coming up, and you see it all as a valid experience. You don't see any of it as wrong. You don't see it as needing to be fixed. You see it all as an expression of this fundamentally trustworthy wholeness and intelligence, and you see it all as poetry. And even the pain, even the difficult times, you hold space for it as poetry, which is not always easy to do, but it's, a never-ending practice of learning to hold space for yourself and hold space for all of life. And I would say God for me is what gives me the strength to do that. I feel like one of the big traps of life is kind of assuming that you're the one doing it all. I think especially for the Western psyche, it's a pretty dangerous view to take, to kind of make yourself into the almighty and say, I'm the one doing all this. There's something about humbling yourself before the infinite principle, the infinite intelligence, and, letting yourself give the glory and the power to God, that for me at least is very important, I've discovered, for the balance of my own psyche. I need some kind of transcendent other, some kind of like higher father and mother to give the glory to and not just put it back on my own ego and surrender to that transcendent principle and let it work through me and really see service as a great honor to get to serve and see giving as receiving, like see that it's a great gift to be able to give and to be able to serve. And that's been one of the hardest ones for me to learn because I've had such a kind of rebellious and like I'm nobody's servant kind of mentality in my life in my younger years, and fatherhood has been a really huge initiation into service for me. But the more deeply that I surrender into service, the more I discover that like this is the most meaningful and purposeful thing we can be doing. And it's, it's what the planet is asking of us at this time. And when we open our hearts and we surrender to love and surrender to grace and let it work through us and let ourselves become instruments, that's when the purest song and the purest dance that we're here to give comes through. It's when we feel most alive and most ourselves. And there's kind of at that point, kind of a collapsing down of the dichotomy of like selfish versus selfless. It just kind of becomes like you are in, it's like fascinatingly the epitome of selfish and selfless kind of becomes the same thing, because the thing that actually feels best for you to be doing in your heart of hearts and in your soul is surrendering into grace led service to the whole. At least that's, my general experience, and other people may have a different experience. But for me, yeah, there's a great truth in that. There's really nothing to do but be you. And the funny thing is just that it can be a very deep process to discover what you are and to peel back the layers and discover what song and dance truly wants to sing itself through me. But when you discover that, that's kind of your dharmic key code. Like, then just dance your dance and sing your song. And that is the greatest gift you could give to all of us, because when we see people who've come alive, it's just like it gives other people permission to come alive. And what's the point of life if not to come alive and share this space and give and create beauty together and love and receive and flow and all the things. So yeah, that's some of what comes up for me.
Right on. Yeah, it reminds me of well, you mentioned the wholeness, and I think that wholeness is God. And what often people in the West, the mistake we make is that we identify our egos with that wholeness. And it's not to say that your ego is not the wholeness; it is a part of that wholeness. It is a part of God, but um, ultimately, your ego is also this. It is also a separate thing. It's hard to describe because it's paradoxical. Um, it's both and. Um, but you also mentioned something regarding God as a form of orientation. That's something I've thought a lot about, in how, our Western society, we don't no longer have, we're mostly secular, and if not like religious in often questionable ways, or religion itself manifests in questionable ways, I find, in society. But if, the mind exists in this massive, in context in this universe, and I think it's so important for people to orient themselves with this transcendent thing outside themselves, like God, for example, or the great mystery, if you want to call it that. And that's like one of the, I guess not, yeah, handicaps that we have as Western people, is that we no longer have this way of orienting ourselves towards the universe, this way of orienting ourselves that is harmonious or complete. I think there's something to the nature-based indigenous practice of like calling in the 4 directions or the 6 directions, including up and down, um, before a prayer, before ceremony, as a way to orient yourself in the mind and place the mind in a context. And so we're lacking that context in Western culture and society. And so people end up being lost or picking up the most unwholesome contexts, perhaps. I don't know if this makes sense, but I just
Oh,
thought
for
I'd
sure.
add that.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Well said. And I totally agree. I think that's one of the deepest pieces of wisdom that I've discovered in life is that if if you don't place the sacred or God or divinity at the top of your hierarchy of values, basically anything else will eat you alive and doesn't lead to good places. Like it feels like reality itself bends toward love with a capital L, and that love, all paths seem to kind of teach beings to align with that love because anything other than unconditional love hurts. It hurts and it's corrosive and it burns, and it's like the karmic meta structure of reality just bends toward love. And so, yeah, for me, it's vitally important to have that North Star of which, yeah, for me, I would articulate as divine love or Christ's love or God's love. Different people can articulate the sacred in different ways. You know, for me, I've deeply reintegrated a lot of my ancestral Christian tradition, but I integrate a lot of wisdom streams and certainly not a traditional Christian. But yeah, that mythopoetic language really resonates with me, and I've had profound mystical experiences of Christ and things like that that have deeply impacted me. But yeah, and one other thing I wanted to add just on that point about like the difference between selfishness and selflessness kind of collapsing when you find your true dharma. I just want to
Mm,
offer a note of caution and say to people that that type of thinking can easily be distorted though and can be a trap. It can be a way to justify a kind of perpetual new age hedonism that's just like, oh yeah, I'm, you know, I'm serving my dharma and the difference between selfish and selfless has collapsed, but actually it hasn't, and you're actually just kind of selfish and self-absorbed, and you know, and that's part of the path. Like I'm probably still in that phase to varying degrees. I think I was more strongly in that phase a few years ago. Um, but yeah, it's just it becomes more and more, you feel it more and more in your heart when it's like when it's really your true dharma, your true purpose. It becomes like devotional, and you genuinely, you really deeply care, and you want to help people. You want to help the earth.
totally. Yeah, I think when there's clarity as to why you're doing it, if you're doing it, if you're clear on doing it for the whole rather than for yourself. But yeah, thanks for that disclaimer. I think it's worth saying because you can easily like use that as an excuse to do whatever you want.
Yeah, for sure. Shifting gears, I wanted to ask you a bit about men's work because we've both experienced a lot of men's work. We both facilitate men's work, and I'm curious, what have you found most valuable about men's work, and what are the biggest shadows you've seen in men's work spaces?
So the most valuable, for me, the most valuable aspect of men's work is definitely the ability to be vulnerable with other men. I think that's kind of just like the basis for me, growing up with a dad who wasn't necessarily emotionally present with me, made it difficult to connect deeply with men, even though there's a very clear sense of wanting that within. Like, my friends, I always end up making friends with guys who are able to be emotionally vulnerable and open. Um, those for me have always been the best friendships. And yeah, I think ultimately at its best, men's work is about wholeness. And that doesn't just include masculinity. It includes the feminine aspects of ourselves as, beings, as spirits. Ultimately, we are, yeah, multi-dimensional beings. And I think it's important to honor both our masculinity, one side of the polarity, and our femininity, if you want to call them that, the yin and the yang of our being. And so I think tying that into the shadow, I think some of the shadows that I've seen in men's work is over focusing on the masculine. And I mean, it's very circumstantial because some guys need to be more focused on the masculine. Some guys need to be more focused on the feminine. But ultimately, it's about coming back into balance. And so, depending on who you are, what you should focus on will change. But I think holding space that recognizes that polarity and the ideal of being in balance is what I'm hoping to offer in men's work, rather than focusing only on the masculine archetypes like the warrior, lover. I mean, I guess those archetypes can apply to both sides, but um, yeah, I think that I'll stop there for now.
Yeah, that's well said. That's well said, and I would agree that to me the most well, I mean, for one, to me the most valuable thing about men's work is the men that I've met through men's work. You, for example, we met in a men's work
Right.
space. We shared space in a Arca circle for a period of time. Shout out to Arca Brotherhood. And yeah, so the men you meet, it's like, well, if you ask yourself, where can I meet some of the most inspiring men on earth? It would probably be in spaces that are literally geared toward men who want to walk the path of wisdom, the path of truth, the path of evolution. So you just meet like really cool and fascinating and inspiring guys in men's work. And I think there's like an effect of osmosis where when you spend a lot of time around like caring, good-hearted men on the path of wisdom, it's just that kind of you become the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with kind of effect. You're kind of naturally gravitationally summoned more into, that type of orbit, and I think you can absorb a lot from the men in these spaces. And at the same time, yeah, I agree that there's just something about being raw, being real, being vulnerable, and being witnessed by men who actually care, who deeply care, that is really, yeah, really healing about men's work.
Hmm.
Yeah. So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that, I'm thinking back to the retreat we just hosted like last week, and I think the biggest takeaway for all the guys there was their feeling of the safety in being emotionally vulnerable, creating that space of safety where, your fullness can come forward. Um, the beauty and the ugly, because we don't really have those spaces in society. At least, we're creating them, so we have them to some degree. But um, yeah, there's also the. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, we don't need to go deep into this, but for me, it's an interesting aspect of men's work that I like to think about because it's what I've seen. And I think it's not everywhere. It's just in some circles, but it's like this performative quality to the masculine. Um, and again, I think this is maybe also my projection of what I see as a sense of focusing too much on the masculine. But to me, like the sense of being quote unquote masculine is like another identity to cling to. And since I see things from a spiritual perspective, it's like, yeah, it's another form of I'm not sure how to describe it, attachment, or I'm curious if you could speak to it more if you've seen it. I think you've been doing men's work and that perhaps you've been in more circles than I have. I'm wondering if you've seen a similar attachment to the masculine and a rejection of the feminine um, in these circles.
yeah, that's a good question, and I do think that's probably the most common shadow of men's work that I would point to as well is like a not only an over focus on masculinity, but kind of a narrow definition of what masculinity is, like kind of like macho, rah, 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 beat your chest kind of masculinity, and a fairly narrow focus on like the warrior archetype, the king archetype, and maybe to a lesser extent, the lover and magician, but a lot of focus on the warrior and king. And in the form of, of men's work that I lead, we journey a lot of different archetypes. We journey a lot of additional archetypes. Right now, we're journeying the wizard, which I guess is similar to the magician, but we've journeyed the inner child a couple times, and we've journeyed the sage, and we've journeyed the caring father, and the son, and the legacy builder, and a lot of different types of archetypes, and I feel like that's presented a more holistic exploration of masculinity and all these different aspects of what masculinity can be. Um, because yeah, I agree with you that fundamentally we are infinite beings who can't be pinned down into any category. Like we transcend and include all these kind of hats that we wear and all these roles that we wear. And we absolutely have both masculine and feminine in us, you know, the order and the chaos, the structure and the flow, the authority and the freedom, the Shiva and the Shakti. Like, and I agree with you that my path too seems to lead more and more toward this kind of balanced integration or harmonious synthesis or alchemization, where these different polarities, rather than being at odds with one another, as they seem to be in many people, kind of at odds or people are imbalanced toward one or the other, it feels like when they are harmoniously integrated, they become almost like a DNA double helix, and it's more like twin dragons that are harmoniously, um, you know, functioning in unison, and then a huge amount of energy and power is released and can be single pointedly directed towards one's north star when one's being is not in conflict anymore, or you know, increasingly in less and less conflict with itself when all these parts kind of get on the same team. So yeah, I think men's work is still kind of in its early days. I think it's been an amazing movement that's brought like so much value to men, and I'm curious about, you know, where it goes from here and kind of evolutionary men's work, integral men's work, kind of moving beyond these somewhat narrow definitions of masculinity to, you know, turning more toward the infinite and a holistic exploration of all these endless facets of the jewels that we are. So,
Mm,
yeah.
beautifully said. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I wanted to ask you as well a question about holding space. So when holding space for others, what approaches or attitudes do you find most important or impactful?
Mm, immediately, the word presence comes to mind. Presence without agenda. Yeah, yeah, I'll go with that for now. I think presence without agenda is probably one of the most important things. Is like, you know, having this deep trust in nature and our ability to heal when the circumstances are made right. Um, Space holding is really about being present to this person and to their process without having your own self-generated, self-centered uh, objective, you know, other than perhaps helping them come back to wholeness. I mean, that's because I mostly work in spaces of healing and personal growth. So not trying to fix, explain, or guide too much or, you know, too soon. Just being fully present and making space for the process to unfold on its own. Um, I think also through that presence, naturally for me comes a sense of the sacred. So not, you know, in a religious way, but in a way that honors like the mystery and the dignity of the process that the person's going through. And again, the word balance comes through. I mean, I think often, especially for me, this is my work, is like I can get quite serious. Not in a sense of like being serious towards the person, but taking the process really seriously, which I think is important, but also, you know, there needs to be humor and lightheartedness in it. And so finding that balance of grounded humor, I found can open up space for a deeper process. And yeah, it reminds me of this quote from, I don't know which Zen master, but it was from a Zen master for sure. It was like, if you are playing games, you will lose your way. If you're too serious, you will lose your way. And so just remembering to approach space holding in that balanced middle path with presence, without an agenda.
Mm, love that. Beautifully said. Yeah. Reminds me of the quote, never trust a shaman who can't laugh in ceremony. I always like that one.
I like
And
that.
yeah, and yeah, I guess to that I would add, which is kind of similar to what you said, presence without agenda, but just kind of this unconditional welcoming, like unconditional acceptance. All parts are welcome. Anything is welcome. For me, that's one of the most important things in the spaces I hold is like giving people full permission to drop the filters, drop the masks, drop political correctness. I mean, and especially in a one-to-one space where it's like it's fully devoted to them. I want to create a blank canvas where any part of them that wants to express in any way is given permission to do that and feels safe to be held in witnessing love as that happens. And yeah, I heard once from a friend said something like, what is welcomed can transform in the context of space holding. And I really like that. I think it's that attitude of welcoming all aspects that creates, yeah, a safe space for people to feel like they can be fully real, they can be their full spectrum selves. And when it's held in that fire of unconditional love, when God is invited into the space and the space is, you know, kind of charged with that light of loving presence, that's when I feel it becomes really alchemical, like where what's brought into that space can be released, can be recycled, digested, alchemized. So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, what you said makes you want to add a word before presence, and that's mindful presence without agenda. Just because I feel like mindfulness and the word really kind of what's defined as like accepting and non-judgmental and curious. So there's that sense of accepting and loving and openness that you're speaking to.
Yeah, beautiful. Um, One final question. If you had an opportunity to send one message to everyone in the world in this moment, what would it be?
Uh, yeah, maybe something about like remembering that you are connected or, that you're not separate. Remember that you are part of this infinitely beautiful and divine web of life, of intelligent life, an intelligent web of life. Yeah, remember that you're connected to this divine and intelligent web of life. You're a part of this earth and of this universe in a way that your rational mind can't understand. And that your actions ripple out into the universe. So remember to be in right relationship too. Yeah, that would be it, I think. And to love one another, of course. I mean, I think this one's been told many times through all the religions and many of the spiritual teachers of the past and currently, but love one another. But again, that I think to me means being in right relationship. So
I was just going to say, you've said right relationship a few times today. I was going to ask you just to expand a little bit on what it means, since that phrase seems really core to you.
yeah, it is core for sure. I mean, I think it just embodies a lot of the things I seek to, or a lot of the ways I seek to live. Um, what does it mean to be in right relationship? It means to live in ways that are respectful, reciprocal. That's an important one. We want to give as much as we take. Um, yeah, with reverence. I guess that relates to respect. With mindfulness, so being mindful and conscious of how our actions are influencing not only other people but also the environment. I think that's one thing increasingly people must and I think will become aware of as we go down this road of what seems to be, at least on a political level, complete disregard for the environment in a time where we like need it most. Uh, yeah.
Beautiful, man. Thank you for defining that for us. And where can people find your work or find out more about what you do?
Yeah, thank you. Uh, there's a few places. I'd say the main point of contact would be like lou.fyi. That's my domain and just like a website with links to other projects because I have my fingers in many pies. I work on many different things. But Psygaia.org, that's Psygaia.org, and it's a word I'm trying to coin, meaning planetary consciousness or ecological consciousness. And that, to expand on, is very much about setting the context for the psychedelic renaissance. Like, how do we want to relate to these substances produced by these intelligent organisms? Actually, we're talking about orientation and setting a context. And I think part of the work for me is like creating that context so that people who are new to psychedelics and approach them for the first time have this really wholesome and mindful and connected context to use psychedelics in holistic context. Psygaia.org, mindfulmensguild.com, mindfulmensguild.com for men's work. But honestly, all of this stuff is accessible through lou.fyi, lou.fyi. So I just direct people there.
Beautiful, beautiful, brother. Well, thank you so much for your time and presence today. It's been a joy to have you and to connect and speak.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, and it's always a pleasure talking to you, Jordan. I appreciate it.